Wish you were one of those influencers with raving fans who binge on your every word, consume all your content, buy everything you have to sell, and demand even more? Then stay tuned while Authority Magazine columnist and BuzzFeed contributor Stacey Harris shares strategies, tips, and tactics from top videocasters, podcasters, authors, and social influencers on creating that bingeable factor. Now, let's join Stacey as she explores how to rise above all the digital noise with the binge factor.
Hey everyone, welcome to Feed Your Brand Center of Influence. And I've got another really cool podcaster for you today. And we found out we're practically next door neighbors on top of everything. So I have a new best friend. Stacey Harris, the Stacey Harris, is a social media strategist and trainer working with frustrated entrepreneurs who are tired of spending hours online. God, I'm tired of spending hours online. This sounds familiar, with no results, right? Because we all know, because I talk about it all the time, 1.3% conversion rate on social media. That's horrible. Through her podcast, live video, membership community, and coaching, she helps business owners take control of their social and actually see results. Oh my gosh, that would be phenomenal. So they can have impact they desire, which, gosh, don't we all want to have some great impact? We're going to connect with Stacey today at the Stacey Harris. I love that because that's your .com, that's your social media. I love it because when you have a regular name, a name that a lot more people have, you got to stand out. So welcome, Stacey.
Thank you. I am super excited to be here. It's funny, the Stacey Harris mostly exists because I didn't realize how common the last name Harris was when I married my husband. And a couple of years after,
it wasn't your real name, right?
I was like, seriously, you couldn't have had something unique that I would have it would have worked. No, so the Stacey Harris took off. So
that's why I have the last name Hazard. I took it as my married name because it was way cooler than my last name, which was Davio. So, and everybody said Davis, and I was like, forget that.
Hazard is super cool. There's you're going to jump over canyons or something.
Who knows what we're going to do? Yeah, actually. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So social media and podcasting really go hand in hand really well. So at what point did you decide to start a podcast in your marketing journey?
So I have been in business about 8 years. We started the podcast 6 years. Oh my goodness, 6 years ago. Started the podcast 6 years ago.
Oh, so you're ancient in the podcast industry.
We've just released episode 459, which is
wow. Congrats. Getting close to that big 500.
Thank you. It really stemmed from, I spent a couple of years subjecting myself to writing blog posts, which was very difficult to me because there's
subjecting yourself right there. It says it all.
There's just a much bigger filter between my brain and my fingers typing than my brain and my mouth, for better. It could go either way, depending on the day.
So I'm curious, how long did it take you to write a blog post, and about how many words was it?
To write like a 500 word blog post, which is not huge at all, would take me like a week. Like it was, and not to mention the time we're not counting, which is the time where you're sitting there thinking about the fact that you should be writing a blog post, which is probably like a month.
Right, exactly. So yeah. LinkedIn did a study, and I cite it sometimes in my talks, and to write a 400 to 600 word post, which is about the average size that most people write, it would take 4 hours or more for most people. You can't run a business and spend that amount of time actually writing, right? It's not possible.
And even more than like the hours spent, like let's separate the tactical hours spent, like the brain space it took up.
Or the nagging, I should be writing right now, right. As you were pointing out. Yeah.
Like just the amount of and then the self-criticism of well, I spent all that time. I spent 4, 6, 8 hours, right? And it's not even good. Like, it's not great.
It's not the best piece of journalism I've ever put out, right?
Not, magical life-changing prose here.
So right after I started my podcast, I got my ink column. That's how I got my ink column, actually. And so they were like, you need to write 6 a month to have a column. And I was like, okay, and how long are they? Like, it's like, and they're like, oh, about 600 to 800 words. I'm like, okay. And so it would be like, I would be like so afraid to publish it because I was like, I'm so critical of myself. I was like, is this any good? It would take me hours and hours just to get it up and published, not even write it. And I was like, this is ridiculous. There has to be a better way. And now I totally do it. I do my podcast interviews and then I write my articles. It's so much easier.
That's exactly what I do. Whenever I submit guest posts to anywhere, whenever I'm writing articles for anyone, they are straight up repurposed from transcripts of the podcast, which is part of the luxury of sticking with podcasting, I think, that sometimes gets forgotten because so much of podcasting is playing that long game, is sort of just sticking with it, even on the days where it feels like it's a lot of effort. And the am I talking to anyone moments. I think about the fact that I have a gigantic library of content now that I can repurpose at any time. It gets turned into the core of my talks when I speak. I'm speaking at She Podcasts in October, and that's
how we met, by the way, guys. So we meet over an event that's all the way across the country, and we're next door neighbors. So
I love when that happens.
Yeah.
But that talk, the base of that talk is a podcast episode I did.
That's awesome. And obviously it had great traction. So you're testing out your content as well.
Exactly.
So tell us more about your podcast. So
my podcast is called Hit the Mic with the Stacy Harris. It's not super cleverly named. I'm the Stacy Harris. And we talk about social media, email marketing, and content marketing specifically. The real core of what we talk about, though, across any of those pieces is strategy and how building and executing your plan is where you actually see results. Because
I was listening to one of your episodes yesterday as I was doing my research, which I always do. And you were like, I think it was probably one of your more recent episodes, and you were giving like the 3 essential things. I don't remember the title of it, but 3 essential things that everyone should be doing. And you were like, I know I have hammered this into you people, but strategy is, I might as well throw all the others out and there's one thing and it's strategy. And I loved that because I think people don't understand actually what strategy is. They confuse tactics and strategy.
Exactly. And so often we see on Pinterest or LinkedIn or wherever that, this thing, Facebook Lives, Instagram stories, these are going to be the things that get you results. And it's like, well, yeah, if your audience will watch a Facebook Live, because here's the deal, guys, mine won't. Like, they won't. They'll listen to a podcast. They're not going to sit there and watch Facebook Live. They will, however, watch me on Instagram stories. So I'm using that tactic. But those both are part of my overall strategy. And here's the real deal is I'm one of the few social media people who will tell you this. It's partnered with an offline strategy, I talk to people. I get on conversations in Zoom and have these conversations.
Whoa, actual people connection.
Referral strategy where my clients refer our agency to their friends and their colleagues. It's a part of a larger marketing strategy. And I think
that.
When we don't get results, it really is, well, I posted something on Facebook one time and nobody bought it.
Yeah. How many people have done that? Everybody, right? Everybody. And, we've been actually having lots of conversations about this because it's not just people who are brand new to this, but those of us who have been doing it for a while, our show up rates are getting lower and lower on webinars and other things. And so, luckily for us, our conversion rate hasn't been hit because the really active people show up. But it's frustrating when you're there and you're like, there's 10 people. There used to be 50. What's going on? It feels frustrating to a lot of people out there marketing today. It's always shifting.
It is always shifting. And this is one of the reasons why I remind people. It's one of the reasons that I'm a social media person who is not the queen of anything. I don't love Facebook. I'm not an evangelist for Instagram. I'm not all about the Pinterest. I use all of them, depending on what I'm doing, depending on who the client is, depending on who the audience is. We're building a strategy based on very old school marketing techniques. Ready for it? Treat people like people, even if they're on the internet. I know it's crazy. Stuff. When you follow that and you build a plan to meet people where they are, to connect with them where they are, to treat them like people, to build relationships and rapport with them, whether that's in person or virtual, that's where you consistently see results. Because maybe I get 10 people to show up, but I got 10 people to buy. I'd rather get 10 people to show up and buy than 100 people to show up and just watch.
I love your message. So how when you started the podcast, I mean, that was pretty early on, 6 years
Mhm.
ago. So, did you think it was going to work, or were you just like, let's just test this thing out and see what happens? And
I think I'm perpetually in that let's just test this thing out. I mean, we're 6 years into the podcast and I'm still testing things. Like we started the show, we did 2 a week. We did 1 interview and 1 solo episode. They were much longer than they are now. Now I very rarely have a
have
guest. We
you,
have guests.
marketing people don't have attention spans. Have you noticed
No.
that?
No, yeah, no. It's we okay, so this worked. Will that work too? Will that work? Even if we find stuff that works, we're like, what else will work? Um, And so for me, it's something that I still play with a lot. And it's helpful because our agency does a lot of podcast production for our clients and along with our social and stuff. And so it's nice because playing with mine allows me to test some things before I try it on other people. It tends to be the guinea pig podcast. I wonder if this
That's why I
works.
have 4, so I can guinea pig different things, right? Oh,
Will
I
this
love
work?
it.
Will this work? But
Yeah.
yeah, I think for me, the biggest relief was I didn't have that, going back to that brain space of avoiding my blog writing. I didn't have that. I went to school to be an audio engineer. My background is in audio. And so, and I'm very excellent. Like, I really love talking. I was the girl in elementary school who got the social butterfly feedback on the report cards.
And your
Um,
parents are like, oh, like,
yeah.
yes, it's an award. Like,
But so for me, it came very naturally. So just the relief initially of like, oh, I have actually found the way I like creating content. And this is why I like strategy over tactic, is what's worked for me was the thing I was most comfortable executing. And I found customers who liked receiving information that way.
I know. Isn't that amazing?
And then we turn
Woohoo!
it into a transcript for people who want to read it. Cool. Our show notes are literally a full transcript of our show. They're much more than 500 words, but if you want to be in there, go at it. There you go. Um,
Absolutely. By the
that was
way,
the
for
biggest for
everyone
me.
who's listening, this is what we advocate for at Monetize as well. Full length transcripts, do it. There's no reason not to. If nobody reads it but Google, you're improving your whole marketing
Oh,
strategy
absolutely.
anyway. Like, that is an important tactic not to skip.
It's the
So
world's cheapest SEO trick.
that's right. Absolutely. So I love that. So has anything really interesting or really exciting happened to you since you started podcasting? Did you get some, great stage offer? What has happened to you?
I think for me, I mean, there's been lots of there's been the basic stuff. I got more speaking gigs. I got invites to come in and speak to people's masterminds because people could see how I talk. They could see how I teach. They could see how I'm going to transfer information from my brain to their brain at the front of the room. You can really feel that experience more in podcasting and even video than you can in a blog post, right? Because very few of us come across the same way we write. And so that was helpful. I got that. But I think the most impactful and exciting, the thing that keeps me podcasting 459 episodes later, is there are people who will DM me on Instagram or send me emails who are like, I've been listening to the show forever. I love it. Thanks for this. Like, or I'll be at a conference and I'll be going up an escalator and somebody else will be going down. And they're like, oh, you're the Stacey Harris. I listened to your show. And I'm like,
I
cool.
know, isn't that cool? It's
That for me, like the people and the relationships I've built and like relationships I've built with people who've been guests on the show where I was like you and I realized when we sat down today, we live next door to each other and we're like, cool, let's get coffee. The relationships and the people I've been able to meet are probably my favorite part, probably the most impactful part. I mean, it helps that it's a huge part of how we get clients and I make revenue and I've gotten speaking and all of that's really fun, but the people are like my favorite part, which
yeah.
sounds super cheesy.
No, but that goes to your topic, building audience and having strategy and then
Yeah.
having a people focused strategy in general. I love that. So no, I agree with you. I think that's my favorite part because, I was working in a home office and, I work with my husband every day and my daughter now. So like if I want to get out of the office, I got to find ways. And so every day I'm technically out of the office, virtually out of the office, getting to meet someone new. It fuels me. So I understand exactly what you mean by that.
Absolutely. It's the best part. It's so fun.
So people who set up their podcast a while ago, we made tons of mistakes and screwed up a lot and had all sorts of things go wrong. What are some funny or just like cautionary tales you have to share about that?
I was really lucky because I knew how to edit. So I skipped all of those mistakes. I think the big mistake I made was trying to fire hose people with information. Like, I think back to how freaking long my episodes were. I was releasing 2 1-hour episodes a week.
That's a lot of work.
Not only is it a lot of work, it's a lot of work to consume. Like, if you think about it from, and this is what we all should be doing, just as a little, side tool here. Think about the person on the consumption side. Think about how long it takes to consume 2 hours of content per week. Now, some people can pull it off. I don't know if you listen to Dax Shepard's Armchair Expert podcast. I do religiously. I'm obsessed with it, but it's way more interesting than 2 hours of marketing advice a week. Let us just be honest.
Yeah, but he's way more interesting than your average person anyway. So like, that's a lucky thing, right?
I would much rather sit and listen to Dax Shepard for 2 hours a week, talk to Peter Krause or who, Busy Phillips is the one I'm listening to right now. It's great. Like, that is entertainment. It's easier to get ingrained in. But when you're doing an info-based sort of like, learn this, execute that, and here's the other side of it. I'm not giving them any time to implement and try any of this stuff because they're so busy consuming all of my stuff. I'm like, no, go do stuff with it.
Exactly what you mean. Our first podcast was in 3D printing, so it was called WTFFF.
Nice.
Right? And that was 4.5 years ago. So we have over 569 episodes, and we did 5 days a week in the beginning. And I was like, now I look back and I go, my poor audience, like, how could they even, now ours were mostly 20 minutes, except for the interviews we did once a week were 45. So like, we weren't at least overwhelming them in length, but still I was like, they could not catch up. The poor people.
Well, and this is why I go back to this idea of sometimes we tend to look around. And I think that was a really popular model several years ago because there were some really big podcasters executing that really well and it worked for them. But sometimes we see what's working for somebody else and we go, okay, so that works. I'll just do it. And we don't go, wait, that's actually not the audience we're talking to. That's not the kind of relationship we want to have with them. That's not in alignment with the values of our brand. The core value for my brand is action. Like, listen to me for 20 minutes and then go do something with this. And then we'll talk again next week.
Yeah, I love that. I talked to Haley Griffiths from the Buffer podcast. So the Science of Social Media. I'm sure you've listened to that one before.
Of course.
And she said that's what they did. They started with this formula of doing an hour, discovered marketers wanted like 10 minutes. And so once they shifted it, their podcast just like really took off too. Listeners, consumed more. They wanted more. They were ready for the next episode. I thought, oh, wow, people really need to sit and think about this because so often we take these guru ideas of how to start our show and what to do, which is why we ended up doing 5 a week. It worked because it did what it was supposed to do to launch us. We accelerated against all the competitors and all of that work. But to keep that up and sustain that wasn't the best interest of our audience.
And it is for some people. John Lee Dumas is a great example of somebody who does a weekly show. But he built a weekly show because it was literally built for commuters. It was built for you to listen to Monday through Friday on your way to and from work. That was the brand. That was the core value of that show. It was created that way for a reason. That's why it worked. It's not that that's a bad idea. It's that's what works for his demographic. Right. That's what works for the value of his brand. And that's awesome. That's not the same as mine. It doesn't make either one of us right or wrong. It just makes us talking to different people. And this is why you have to build your strategy, not follow blueprints, not, the Pinterest best times to post articles are always the things that drive me the most crazy. Because I'm like, look at your analytics. That's your best time to post. It varies. We have to build our own strategy for our own audience.
Oh, absolutely. I love that. Well, let's hit into the core of some of our tips, and you've been giving us so many great ones already. Let's hit for some of the best ways to do some things. Some of the best ways you found to book great guests.
Referral. For me, asking people who I have loved interviewing, who they know, is hands down my favorite way to find guests because cool people tend to know cool people. And I think too often we default to, ooh, I heard so-and-so on that show, and so I'll book them too. And I think that's how we end up with guests who are kind of on the, and there's nothing wrong with this, I do it regularly. We're kind of on the podcast tour, and we kind of all end up releasing the same show around the same time. Whereas when I say, hey, who do you know that you're feeling really inspired by right now? Who do you know that you really love talking to? Then you tend to get like their biz bestie who's maybe not on the podcast tour right now. And you go, would you mind introducing us? Those were always my favorite guests. Those were always the people who I have ended up like actually being like friendly with and having a relationship with. So referrals and just like asking people, still my favorite.
Love that. How about increasing listeners? What are some best ways to increase listeners?
For me, having a really solid marketing strategy for the podcast. I think we sometimes think about marketing strategies for our offerings and we forget that we have to market our content. Producing an episode is not enough. There's a whole part after that. And I think the biggest part that gets left out of that is marketing your old episodes. We tend to think about our most recent episode and it's we've loved this week's episode and then this is week we're going to talk about. But actually the bulk of my new listeners stumble upon me somewhere in the catalog.
Yeah, we got binge listeners, guys.
People, you know, they find something and they're like, oh, I was looking for this solution. And so making sure I'm regularly sharing everything from my catalog and really intentionally regularly sharing the podcast just as value. I think it's my favorite way to grow listenerships. Every once in a while we go on a real kick where we'll even build some cold ads, like ads to people who've not heard the show before that are not to buy anything, not to opt in for anything. We're just putting the episodes that maybe done the best in the last quarter in front of a cold audience. That is always good for a big spike. And that usually sticks around because we're just running them content that they love.
Love that. Love that. So you are an audio engineer, as you mentioned. So producing in a professional way, what can your average person do?
I think that we tend to think that podcasts are more difficult than they need to be. If you put a little bit of thought into where you are and what you're speaking into, I find that the biggest fixes audio-wise are actually super cheap. Put in headphones, even if you're recording alone. If you want to hear back what you're listening to, too often we hear people who like are listening to themselves and they're like listening to themselves through the speakers. And I'm like, no. If you want to listen to yourself, which I don't know why you want to do, but if you want to do it through the headphones. And then also pay attention to the space you're in. Put some stuff on the wall, throw something over your computer. Just softening what's around you will go a long, long way.
Oh my gosh, you're speaking to the choir. We like literally have done whole episodes on that because it's the number one thing people make the mistake of. And it creates so much more work in editing later, so much more time or money spent depending on whether you're doing it yourself or paying someone.
And they so often think, oh, well, if I just had a better mic. Well, no, a better mic is just going to pick up your terrible room noise.
This is right. Yeah, absolutely. We have a whole actually comp on it because we found the same thing. Yeah.
You can't polish a bad room.
I love it. Okay. Encouraging engagement. So, I mean, this is the thing, like, you know, we keep talking about here and sort of is the buzz out there is that it's great to have a lot of followers, but if you don't have engagement, you really have nothing. So how can you encourage engagement? You should be an expert in this. So I'm so looking forward to your answer here.
So for me, I think it starts at the very first part. So let's say with our podcast, we're talking to them. Think about the mindset that you're producing content from. Are you talking with your audience or at your audience? What is the environment that you're creating? My episodes are almost always alone, and it literally sounds like I'm having a very one-sided conversation at the moment because it's your job later to come in and share your part. And I tell them, here's the idea, guys. We got to tell these people things over and over and over and over again. It's just part of it. And so I say, DM me your questions, you know, let me know on Facebook what you thought. But also I leave things open. Hey, I'd love to hear how you're using this, those kind of things. And then here's the secret sauce. When you get one person to engage, respond back to them.
Whoa, answer your own.
Because so often we're like, oh, only one person engaged. Why won't anybody engage? But we never responded. Or we went, thanks for listening. No, I love that you love the show. What was your favorite part? Who would you like to see on a future guest? Do you have a favorite episode? Ask them a question. Keep the conversation going. Remember, treat these online interactions the same way you would if you were in a room. If somebody came up to you and you're like, oh, I love that episode you did with Stacy. And then you were like, great, thanks for listening.
Yeah.
And walk away.
That would be horrible. That would not be me. So right. That would not be normal. So I love that.
Oh, that's awesome. We loved having Stacy. I really loved what she said about such and such. What was your takeaway? Did you take action on anything?
Yeah.
Because the more you engage, the more people see that. Not to mention from an algorithm, I'll get the word out, an algorithm standpoint, it's more, whether it's you or them, that's more comments on the social piece, meaning now it's seen as important and people see it.
Then more people will see it and maybe more people will engage. Woohoo. Imagine that.
You have to respond back.
Yeah. Some of the best ways to monetize your show. Now, I'm sure you're monetizing it in a more business forward way. But how are some of the other people you've helped?
So for me and for our clients, we're all monetizing through our own businesses.
Us
for
too.
me, that's the most reliable way to monetize your podcast is build it around a service. Now, that's not the same for everybody. It's certainly there are shows like Dax Shepard's podcast or West Wing Weekly is another one I love where they're monetizing through ads because that's the model for the format of their show. But in my experience, if you're giving information, if you are sort of, whether it's B2B or B2C, we have clients, we have a client whose podcast we produce who's a relationship coach. And so it's B2C very much. Like she's not talking to business owners and selling business tactics here. But we're monetizing it through her programs and through her other offerings. And so I think whenever possible, if that's an option, that's my preferred way. I think it's got the best ROI. It's got the most consistent ROI, and it allows you to maintain a ton of control creatively.
So important. I love it. Authority. That's what we call it here. Authority. You've got a ton of authority. So you have created a show that is in some ways, if you're looking for something and people find you, it becomes bingeable because now I want to hear what you have to say about Instagram, LinkedIn. I want to go through the whole thing. I want to hear about the strategy thing. I hear you mention it here and now I've got to go back to the beginning. But there are a lot of podcasts out there in social media and other areas. What makes you different? What makes you what's your special thing? What makes you unique?
Well, I am the Stacy Harris.
That's right.
You need more. I think for me, and this is universal, podcast, social, nobody is saying anything unique at this point. We're far enough into the whole written word thing that most of us are sharing our version of something, right? And I think a personality plays a big part. There are absolutely people who could get tons from my show who just aren't into it. And that's cool. And there's people who love my show that don't love other social media shows. And that's fine. There's also people who love my show and every other social media show. And that's cool too. For me, it's about making sure that when you're listening to me, it makes sense. It's easy to consume. I'm not spitting jargon at you. I'm not making anything more complicated than it needs to be. It is not my job to make you feel like I'm smarter than you. It is my job to have a conversation with you about what you want next in your marketing. And that's what I do. And I think that sometimes is different.
Yeah. I mean, let's have a real chat. I love that. It's really great. So you are obviously everywhere on social media. Are you everywhere at the Stacy Harris?
I am. So my personal brand stuff is the Stacy Harris everywhere, and our agency is everywhere at Uncommonly More. I like uniformity in social handles whenever humanly possible, because it's super easy to just go, yep, just Google the Stacy Harris, and every search result will be some social media channel of mine and my website.
I love it. I love it. Well, it is, there's another Tracy Hazard who's a musician. And so you would think that her because iTunes and all of that stuff would outrank me every day, but it doesn't, because my amount of content beats her every day. So I actually am lucky that my name is it's common enough, but it's not, but I'm outranking because of the content. And so that really helps you. But,
It does.
here's a mistake one of my clients made, which I would love to share with you, because we were talking about having a common name as an issue, and you managed to brand that and work around that. He has not not an uncommon name, but, and he's pretty well known in his industry, but, it's distinctive enough. But he made the mistake of trying to be really personable and really approachable on his website, as advised by a branding strategist. And so it says Adam this, Adam that. It was everything just his first name. Well, that will never rank on Google. So he's typing in his name into Google and nothing is showing up. And I was like, whoa, you just made this tiny little rookie error. And from bad advice from a branding strategist, of course. I mean, he didn't do it himself. And I was like, we can fix this. And within 2 weeks, it was adjusted and it was fine. But classic problem when you have a common name too, like you need to add something to it, and you managed to do that. That's great branding.
Thank you. It's interesting because I lucked out sort of the other way when I decided to do the whole personal branding. I had been in business a couple of years and I really wanted a Twitter handle that was my name. And so I was able to navigate and get the Stacy Harris. And it was funny. I was at the time co-hosting a web show called YFE Chat, Young Female Entrepreneurs Chat. I was much younger then. And I was actually a young entrepreneur. And, the host always referred to me as the Stacey Harris, all one word. And it became a joke. And it kind of took on this weird life of its own. So I kind of lucked out the other way. So now when I write stuff and when I sign off on stuff, and even in our emails and things like that, when we sign off on content, we're always using the Stacey Harris, essentially as if it were one word. But it really came from the host of the show I co-hosted kind of thinking it was fun and being like, and sort of making it a thing. And so it's funny because as much as I would like to be like, it was completely intentional and I'm very smart and I totally knew it, I just lucked out the other direction.
I love it. I love it. So you were mentioning that you've mentioned Dax Shepard, but who else would you love to interview? Who's your big get?
I don't think I would actually like to interview Dax Shepard because I don't think I could keep control of the interview.
It would be. You're right. It would be
by him because I'm not willing to share that level of emotion. I can't get on his level stories wise. I'm not as cool. My big get. Ooh, that's such a good question. I think for me, so I love politics. I'm a big so like Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, like that for me would be like, I'm gonna die. Like there would be heavy breathing and like a lot of champagne that got consumed when I got that. Yes.
We might be able to get Katie Porter in. I mean, she's in our district here.
That's true. She is. She's also just down the street.
Right.
But I think something like that. I think for me, I'm really moving into a phase in my life, and to get really cheesy with it, like my legacy, where I'm really looking at the impact that we have as we get bigger messages and bigger megaphones and more money in the economy and those things. As female leaders, we're really positioning ourselves to make some really cool moves and have a really big impact in a way we haven't ever been able to before. And so I think if I were to start another show today, it would definitely be something more driven by that impact and getting those kind of guests who have navigated some really crazy times historically and some really crazy events in their life and worked through them so that they could stand up at that megaphone and really make that impact.
Oh, I love that. That's so kind of interesting that you would do something more personal than less business this time around. I think
so. I think that'll be the next one. It certainly has no release date or name as of now. I'm fully busy with the current show. But it's either that or like full on like a TV driven, just like guilty pleasure kind of show. One of the two.
So the show Hit the Mic goes live what days?
We go live on Thursdays.
Thursdays. Okay, so you air on Thursdays. Love it. So everyone, the Stacy Harris, you can find her everywhere on social media. You can also find all links to her in the blog post for this episode at feedyourbrand.co. And we will have a follow-up article coming out in Authority Magazine as well. And for those of you who are in the podcast industry and don't know, you can be featured by me in Authority Magazine and get one of these interviews. You just have to apply, and you can apply at feedyourbrand.co/PR now. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. Stacey, thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to get together in person and have some serious social media debates here about what's going on in the industry too. I look forward to maybe having you on the show again to talk some more and deeper about developing a social media strategy for your show, because I think that would be really valuable to this audience. So thank you again for being here today. Everyone out there, go feed your brand. Go build your center of influence. Go out there and podcast. Just get going, because it is so valuable. And we're bringing you people every single week who are showing you that again and again. So thank you all for listening. This is Tracy Hazard on Feed Your Brand.
You've been listening to the Binge Factor podcast. For more information on podcasting and videocasting success tips and tactics, please go to thebingefactor.com. And be sure to listen to our other show for podcasters called Feed Your Brand. If you'd like to be interviewed on this show, as well as featured in Tracy's column, please go to thebingefactor.com/guest and apply.